Well, welcome everybody to Adath's Everyone Has a Story. Welcome Rabbi Whitman. Our speaker for the evening is Sandra Koukou. She's going to be interviewed by a very esteemed lawyer and filmmaker, Carol Basri. Welcome. And welcome to all our participants who have signed up this evening. Sorry for the little last minute tech glitch, and I hope that within the next few minutes we're going to see the rest of the people who signed up able to come in on the Zoom. There's always small technical things, but I think the miracles of Zoom and modern technology are just so wonderful that we can just sit at a desk or at a comfortable chair and really have wonderful programming coming straight to us. So Sandra Koukou, lovely, lovely lady, was born to Iraqi Jewish parents who emigrated to Tehran, Iran. Sandra received an English education at the American International School and later at the Rhode Island School of Design in painting and photography. In the aftermath of the Islamic Revolution, she returned to Iran to help her family. She later co-wrote the book. If you've read their book, it's available on Amazon and through the Adath. So she co-wrote the book with her father years later when her parents lived as political asylum refugees in Long Island, New York. And Sandra lived in Montreal, where she settled with her husband. This father-daughter project is a memoir of how Mr. Joseph Heskel Koukou survived the physical and mental rigors of 4 years in the notorious Evin prison in Tehran, and how his daughter Sandra gathered her courage and her strength to aid in his release. But it's so much more than that, as you soon will see. Sandra worked in Tehran at a Belgian engineering company in the pre-computer age, and she revised their filing system, then revised the visa application system for foreign expats at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Iran. Sandra and her Belgian engineer husband moved to Belgium, where their daughter Naomi was born. Next, they moved to Abu Dhabi for his work. Their son Michael was born in the US, but the family settled finally in Montreal. However, it resulted in a divorce. After other contracts in Montreal as an administrative assistant, Sandra is still working at the Archives Department of the Anglican Diocese of Montreal. During COVID, she painted the portrait of the present bishop, and her portrait of the author Naim Katan hangs in the lobby of the Spanish and Portuguese. And Sandra is very, very involved at the synagogue, at the volunteer level, being very, very active in the women's learning group, and she still continues to paint. And we'll hear all about her story tonight. Now, Carol Basri, we're very lucky to have tonight in conversation with Sandra. She received her BA from Barnard College, a degree from Columbia University and the New York University School of Law. She was a visiting professor at several foreign universities and the adjunct professor at Fordham Law School, where she created the first LLM in corporate compliance. She was also the adjunct professor at the University of Pennsylvania Law School. In 2003, Ms. Basri was a member of the US State Department's Future of Iraq program, and member of the Coalition Provisional Authority with the Iraqi Reconstruction Development Council for Ambassador Bremer in Baghdad. She is also a filmmaker and the executive producer of a trilogy of films on the Jewish community and history of Iraq. The Life of Frank Eni, Searching for Baghdad, The Lost Jews of Baghdad, screened in over 80 film festivals in North America, Israel, and Europe, as well as on television. She also produced a short documentary on hemophiliacs in Iraq who received tainted blood. She's been a commentator on the various major news networks in the States like CNN, MSNBC, Fox, PBS, and Iraqi News. And she commented on Saddam's trial, Iraqi elections, and constitution. And so we have two very wonderful women. I'm going to let them take it over from here. Thank you very much. So you can go ahead.
Hi, Sandra. First of all, it's a real honor to be with you today. And I want to thank Bonnie for a beautiful introduction for Sandra and for me. You really took time to learn about us, and I really appreciate how really you opened my eyes to so many things as we were going through our preliminary discussions. You've just done a wonderful, wonderful job. I also want to thank Stu Gutman for his help, and of course the Rabbi of Adath Israel for all that he has done. So let me start with that. Now, Sandra, I have known for a while now, and it's just been a complete honor. When she gets on the phone, you feel happy to be in her presence. And again, that beautiful rose in the background, fabulous. And it matches her outfit, it's great. So let's start a little bit. Your father was born June 6, 1924. So he really saw a lot of history in that time. And he was in Evian prison with the Ayatollah Khomeini in 1979. Could you tell us a little bit about his childhood and also how he ended up in Evian prison in 1979?
Thank you, Carol. Thank you, Bonnie, and everybody. One thing that wasn't in my bio was I have 3 grandkids, and I hope one day they'll be able to read this book. So my father, their great-grandfather, was born in Basra, which is just across the river from Iran, from Abadan, the oil refineries. And his family never really saw any of the persecution that happened in Iraq due to the Nazi regime in Germany having gotten a lot of influence in Iraq. And as a matter of fact, all over North Africa, every Arab country, he bought columns in their newspapers and put different installments of Mein Kampf. But to go back to my dad, they left in the early 1930s. So the Farhud and all the persecution of the Jews of Iraq happened after that. And the reason why my grandfather settled his family in Isfahan, in the heart of Iran, is because there was a car dealership and he was invited to partner with somebody. So he settled there, the family. My father is the oldest of 5 kids. And Isfahan is where my grandfather built a Jewish school. And it was the first school actually that at the time, the kids didn't have to sit on the floor. There were tables and benches. And so other Iranians, more notably the people of the government and all, they put their kids in that school too. my grandfather then moved the family to Tehran when my father was around 19 or 20. And that's where there was a considerable Iraqi Jewish community. So my grandfather asked a man by the name of Mir Abdullah, he said, you know, you don't have family, you don't have inheritors. This man, he made a lot of money supplying to the Allied forces during the war because they used Iran as a passage, the Russians, the Brits, and the Americans. And so he made a lot of money giving supplies. So my grandfather told him, you can do something, you know, you're gonna die very soon. Like he was very ill, you can do something for your community. So build a synagogue. The Iraqis don't have one. So he did. He said, in one condition, that it's shaped like an airplane. And now I know why my son, who looks like my grandfather, he's a pilot, but that's another story. So we had a very wonderful life. I think it was the last golden age the world ever knew. It was the Shah's Iran. He was so good to the Jews. He and his father, my dad said, the best time the Jews had in Iran were under Reza Shah and Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. So my father built a factory for brake linings. He calls them friction parts. They are brake pads for cars, buses, trucks. It was the only one in the Middle East, and it worked so beautifully without a flaw. He built it so properly that years after the revolution, they didn't need, you know, they didn't have problems. Everything was in good shape. But then the revolution happened, and anyone who was, quote unquote, a capitalist was put in prison. Their houses, their bank accounts, whatever the government could put their hands on, if you can call it a government, they expropriated. And so my father was put in prison, actually not because his workers loved him. I mean, a very kind man. Anybody who had a daughter to marry or somebody sick, I mean, he's the one who would help them. But the thing is, they didn't like his partner, who was Iranian, a Muslim, his partner of many years. They thought he was very arrogant and he talked down to them. So they said, Aghay Koukou, don't get yourself involved. We have nothing with you. We just want Javad out of the way. And my father, being a mensch, I mean, he couldn't let him down. So he was chucked in prison too. And then pretty soon, there were all kinds of lies built. Workers saying that he sold MiGs to Israel. Oh yes, we heard him on the phone. He was with Israel on the phone, which is total baloney. And he had a sentence to be executed. And when I heard this, it was, for me, it was an existential moment. And I have to thank Bonnie, because I never really, I mean, I showed this book to my community. We had a big brunch one Sunday. Many people came. Eminent speakers spoke about the book. But in my community, in my home, with my people, it never really occurred. I mean, the memory of that moment that I'm going to speak about right now, it didn't come back to me until now, until I met Bonnie. And saw how interested she was. And like, I said, wow, this is one smart woman. And all of a sudden, the image of that moment came to mind. That was the moment that helped me save my father's life. I remember the light, a very bright, in Iran, it's a yellow light. It's a beautiful, beautiful sun. And I was facing the big wall of Evin prison. I mean, prior to that, we used to live in the suburbs of Tehran, beautiful area, nice houses. You have this water rushing down the mountain from the snow melt. And we used to go horseback riding right around there with my aunt and my dad, who had a horse. He kept it in the corrals of Sarhang Sheki, this colonel who had a manege. I never knew that those walls were a prison. I mean, we used to go horseback riding there or bike riding with the whole family. But I was standing in front of this big, huge iron gate. And I was thinking, who am I? Who am I? They want my father because he's Jewish, or because, well, yeah, he's Jewish, so they want him. That means they want me. And by extension, that means they want all of you. If they had a chance, they would indict all of us because we're Jewish. And it's not the first people who've done this in history. So I just thought, like, I have to find out who I am. So look, I mean, American school, we had a weekend on Sunday, and then because we were in Iran, the national holiday, was Friday. So on Saturday, we went to school. We didn't know we never did Shabbat. We knew it was Shabbat, but I had to find out who I was. And the only way I could do it was to not accept the status quo. I had a very sophisticated education in an American school, an international school. We had kids from all the faiths, all the races, all the nationalities, elbow to elbow, learning every day, and we celebrated our differences. It wasn't toleration, no. It was a mosaic. It was coexistence and celebration. We used to have United Nations Day every year. We'd all be holding flags from all the different countries and parading on the basketball court. So the only way I didn't know about my Torah. I didn't know all the things I know now. But I knew that I had to fight. I had to not accept the status quo. So years later, when my father is in North America, and so am I, he said one day he wants to write a book about the Hebrew Bible. So I said, wow, this is my chance to find out who I am. So I said, I'll edit it, I'll help you, because his was a Persian English. So he would ask me to, for 3 years, every night, for 3 hours, we would work together by phone, him from New York and me in Montreal, and by email. So he would send me some text and I would send it back and he'd say, it's too long, what is this? And then because I heard him and I felt his voice, I redid it and he said, oh, it's perfect. All I need to do is tell you one thing and you get it. You just get it. So that went on for 3 years. And So then he had mesothelioma because in the factory, they use asbestos. That's one of the products that goes into the brake pads. And it only manifests like 30 or 40 years later. It stays couched in the lungs, and then it starts to, these little filaments start coming out. And the last year and a half we worked together, his voice was very difficult over the phone. It broke my heart each time we had to work. He fought so hard to get his intention out so that I can get it and put it down in a modern speak, because he felt that this is such an important message that he has to leave, and he's just fighting time. So I was working with Author House. Just before he passed away, I showed him the last version of the book, and he okayed it. And a few days later, he died. And I had to take it to the publishers. And the publisher said, there's too much from Wikipedia. I said, yes, I know, we were fighting time. He said, do you know anything about Weitzman? And so I'd look on Wikipedia so that I could send him something on the email. So the editor said, you have to go and find all of these things from a book source. So I did. I was laid off from work at a publishing company. And I worked at the Westmount Library for 3 months. I found the most fabulous books. And everything, there were like 50 references that I had to find from a book. So in a way, I had to rehaul the whole book. But I was, Carol, I promise you, I stayed close to what my dad wanted, because by that time I was used to. You have to unmute yourself.
Oh, I'm sure that that's the case, that you stay true to it. You're such a devoted daughter, and it comes through in the book. I wanted to ask you a little bit. Let's go back a little bit, because you've covered a lot of ground here. Your father owned a factory. It was making automobiles with a Muslim partner.
No, brake pads, the part that
he was making the brake pads. Oh, okay. I thought it was a licensing for cars. So the brake pads. And give me an idea of what life was like for, just short, but what was life like for you during that period? You were going to the international school. Were you in Iran at this point, or in Isfahan?
Oh, no, Isfahan, no. I was born in Tehran, because when my dad was 20, around 20, as I said, my grandfather moved the family to Tehran. And there we had a flourishing, a big, huge Babylonian community, Iraqi Jewish community, yes. And that's where my grandfather built a school, another Jewish school, and he encouraged Mir Abdullah to build our synagogue, the one that we went to for all our—
It's like an airplane. And the brake pad factory was in Tehran or in Isfahan?
No, Isfahan, we left that behind. Forget that. That was during—
The brake pads are left behind now, or
No,
they have— what was your father doing?
Isfahan is the past. He left Isfahan. It was right outside of Tehran. It was a factory that was producing brake pads for cars, buses, and trucks. So he was never really a religious person. He had a lot of, our faith was rock solid. we had a wonderful community. We would get together typically like Jews do all over the world. We'd have parties, 70 people, and everybody would respond with their own. And it was a very close-knit community. And we had a very happy childhood. So everyone else was doing amazing things because the Shah let us do those things.
I understand. So now we have an idea of what it was like. How did he get into the factory himself? How did he get into that business?
Well, that's a great question. My grandfather, having worked with his partner in Isfahan that he left with in the car industry, he came to Tehran. He started a spare parts business. And so my father said, why don't we do our own spare parts? And, I remember my mom saying, Wilak Youssef, ma ta'araf honi mamlaka Muslim. It's a Muslim country, you can't make yourself so settled, like, the image of the Jew with a bandana on your back. You have to be ready to get up and go at short notice. And when Khomeini was scheduled to come back to Iran, they told my dad, get out, take your family out. He had a factory. He had spent 18 years paying back the bank. And finally, when it was in full productivity, Khomeini arrived. So it's easy to judge, but how would he feel? He put so much into this, and then he has to leave. Well, at least live with something. So it was full profits now, no paying the bank. At least he could amass something to answer for all of his work all his life.
Right.
But fate had it that he had to go to prison to find out who he was. And then later on, when I worked with his book, I found out who I was. And now I want my grandkids to know who they are. But
Very
also,
good.
I
So
want...
let's stop there. You've gotten up to why he was in the brake factory in Tehran, and that he was involved with that when the Ayatollah Khomeini came into power. So that's a very important thing. And I just wanted to say that was one of the issues that all Jews have: when they should go, when they should stay, what should happen. It's a very difficult thing. So I understand that, and that's the complexity. What would one do in that situation? Would they go? Would they stay? Would they wait until they had a little more accumulated? It's a very touchy issue. And so it brings us now to him being in prison for 4 years. Can you explain a little bit more? So this was his workers. Was his partner involved in saying anything against him? Or that was with your grandfather, the partner?
No. It was my father's partner. He asked him to partner with him to build a factory. So that's how that started. They were good friends. They were good friends. He and his partner Javad. It's just that the workers, there was this atmosphere in Iran at the time. Khomeini promised everything to the poor, the oppressed. And he said that their problem was that the Shah didn't give them anything, and the capitalists are they're taking everything, and nobody is helping the oppressed. So anyone who was a capitalist was chucked in prison. I mean, I don't know one Iranian who didn't have one uncle or a father or son or aunt or somebody in prison after the revolution. So they wanted the factory, actually. They wanted to take it. It was a gold mine. So they put the owners in prison and they sit there. And then in order to keep them away, well, oh, this guy's a Jew. Let's label him as a Zionist. And the other guy, it was just, you know, suspended in midair. And if you ask me what I went through after the revolution, it was week after week after week for 2 years that my mother would call the prison and they would say, call back next week for 2 years. Finally, I had to step in.
Wait a second. We're jumping ahead a little bit. So we want to develop the story a little bit. Okay. And you're doing a wonderful job. I mean, you're fabulous at this, but let's understand what happened to his business partner. He was Muslim. Was he sentenced to death as well?
No. He, after my intervention, stopping the car of the judge, we'll get into this.
That's where I want to end up, but let's not.
We
jump
finally
ahead.
got, yeah, but I have to answer that in this way only. That's the only way I can answer it, is that we had a judgment finally. My father had 5 years instead of execution. My father's partner got 3 years, and his cousin, the engineer, got 2. But the miracle was that my father had, and I learned this only years later here in North America while we were working on the book. He and it's in the book, during the trial, he kind of charmed the judge. And this was a bloodthirsty Judge Gilani. He was very well known for a new method. He put everybody against the wall, brought a reporter, and he mowed everyone down. And that was the program that was, my dad was supposed to be that way. So, but my dad was able, you know, like he got so much from the Bible, from his readings, even translating it to his cellmates to help them survive their trauma, that he was able to touch, someone said, some resilient humanity, some residual humanity in this man. After all, he's also a human being too. And my father was able to pull at his heartstrings. How?
How did he do that? Yes, how? Because that's an interesting point. Somebody that's this hard, and it's amazing. So let's explore that.
So during the court case, you know, a lot of workers, they started talking such bad things about him. Oh yeah, I heard him on the phone with Israel. He's sending MiGs. Or like, you know, they have no education. They're trying to build up a story, and finally his secretary, my dad's secretary, said, there's no such thing. I'm there to tell you, he was the kindest man you ever met. He helped all of these people. Finally, my father said, here's the only man I see in this whole courtroom is the woman. No, but then he said, the judge said something, and then my father told him, you know, I know the law of Ali. Ali is the martyred, one of the relatives of Muhammad. And he's the one around whom the Shia sect of Islam, which is all of Iran, is based on. So he says, I know the law of Ali. And I know that if you don't give me an adequate judgment, up there, a judgment will be given. So he was speaking to this Ayatollah about religion, which is his thing. And also he was pointing at his conscience, which is what we Jews are very good at. And him being such a kind, approachable man, and he used to organize these speaker events in prison. Everyone would have their story. Everyone has a story. So he'd give each one of them a chance to tell their story, and they would organize and they would do cleaning up. You know, today it's you, tomorrow it's you. So he got them feeling as though, you know what, it's a prison here, but it's a worse prison outside. So we might as well use our time, constructively. So all this helped him talk to the judge as he would have talked throughout his life, the way he talked with his workers, the way he talked with Jew, non-Jew, everybody.
Beautiful. Now, let me have an idea. Did you go to the trial?
Oh, no. The only thing we had access to was my dad behind a glass window. Every 2 weeks, my mom would prepare a basket with fruits and vegetables, and we were allowed to go. And 15 minutes, that's it, behind the window.
How did you become aware that he was on trial with this judge? He told you?
Well, yeah, but exactly, good question. 2 years passed from the from the court date, and we still didn't have a judgment. And my mom, that's where I was telling you that my mom kept calling, and they said, Khanum, hafteye ayande, call next week. And so it was just suspended like that, so they don't have to do anything, so that they can, enjoy the fruits of the factory. And so there was a man who came out of prison. He just had a beautiful restaurant. His wife was a Swiss woman. And she got very friendly with my mom. And she said, there's this Mujahid. Those were the Marxist, counter-revolutionaries. He wanted to show that we're not Marxists, we're not communists, we're helping a capitalist. So he was helping her get her husband out. So my mom said, okay, if he can do something for us. But I saw that he keeps pulling money out of my mom and my sister, and they would sit there and they would chuck me in the kitchen because supposedly I was very sensitive. So don't let her hear any of this. And he kept pulling money out of them, and I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, contact this mullah and that. Nothing happened. And whenever he would put my mom in front of a mullah to discuss my dad's case, she would freeze up. Like she had a lifetime we had a beautiful life. So she was a homemaker, and she wasn't used to, she was frightened. So she would purse up. And the Mujahid one day came to me, says, I have no choice but to turn to you. Because your mom, she cannot talk with these people. So that's when I said, okay, I have to find out who I am. Oh, you're muted.
Before we find out who you are, how did your father find Hashem, the Torah? Explain that process. It's more than just being in prison. That's a life-changing moment. What's your insight into that? What triggered it? You told me that he ran programs for the prisoners, that he tried to give them the
Hope.
support they needed and the faith they needed to be able to exist in such a horrible situation. We all know about Evian prison, how horrible it was. So if you could give us an insight into that turning point, that would be terrific.
My sister used to say Dad was the court Jew. He was surrounded by all these top-notch people of the Shah, the head of the Air Force, the ambassador to the UN, all these ministers. And the only book he was allowed in there was the Bible. And he started to read, and he really went deep, and he found things in there that honestly may have flown over the head of the rabbis. He had the time to comb through the written word to the point where his conclusion was in the book that we wrote together was that, I remember when I showed it to Rabbi White, just so he can tell me if there's anything to change or correct, I gave him a manuscript. He said, you know, just flipping through this at a quick glance, here he says, just from this introduction, I can tell it's going to be a beautiful book. I said, what did he say? He said that the Hebrew Bible is like a work of art. All the pieces fit in like a puzzle. You take one piece out, the whole thing falls apart. And I know that when you paint, when you try to do a decent work of art, you don't put one thing here just because you like it. You put it there because it enhances something else somewhere else. And whatever you do here or there is going to affect the other place. And so you are the designer. You know what fits, and you had an intent. And so we're being told that it's God's word. It has to be. Because if you take one piece out of there, the other parts, they don't make sense. Because everything fits in so beautifully. It's a masterpiece. And he began to delve, and he can pinpoint, who are these birds that fly to the window? Isaiah. He says this is an airplane window. Hello? Israel was landlocked when they were trying to bring the immigrants. They had to use either air or sea. And so they brought, they brought a lot of immigrants by ship. It's all in there. It's all in the book. I did a lot of research. I even went beyond what my dad wrote because of all the books that I found after the editor told me to go into book sources. And the history of how they got people into the land when it was landlocked is nothing short of biblical.
It is. On the wings of I was going to say on the wings of eagles.
And that too.
It's so beautiful. I think now you're really exposing the soul of your father. That's so beautiful that he was able to make those connections. And I found the book fascinating. The first part is really the story of your father, the family, the escape, and leaving Iran. And we're going to go through that more. But the second part is clues from biblical history. And he does such an amazing job there. He talks about biblical history, the Jewish nation in exile, history of the Jews in Iraq and Saddam Hussein, Israel the source, Arab nationalism, white paper in World War II. And he also does two other sections. One was on reflections, actions, and destiny, self-help, personal destiny, the power of prayer, the three monotheistic faiths, nature's silent faith, and communism versus religion. So we're not going to be able to get into all of that in this time, but I would like to spend a little more time on the story, just so people understand the depth of his wisdom and what he learned from that experience in prison, being left with only the Bible to look at. Were there any rabbis in prison with him?
There was one. There was one.
And how did he impact your father while he was in prison?
I'm trying to remember. There was a story about it. I'm not very clear. My memory is fading as to that, but there was an anecdote I could have shared with
That's
you.
okay. That's all right. No problem. But that's interesting that there was a rabbi in prison, so that he was able to communicate a little bit with him. And then can you tell us a little bit about what happened with you and the judge? How did you meet the judge? And how did you save your father? Because this is where you have your moment of actualization.
And I think it was rooted in that moment, which I totally forgot, and Bonnie brought that back to me, is when I said, that can't be, you know, all these Iraqi Jews who fled during the 50s from Iraq, and we never knew all that pain. We lived such a privileged life in Iran, and now it's our turn. We thought that this would go on forever. The Shah is so powerful. He's holding the peace in the region. It can't happen. It was the furthest thing from our radar. But one day in the prison, when my mom and I went, we were sitting in the women's waiting room, and my father's partner's wife, her sister, was telling my mom, "Khanum Koukou, bayad dobare kheli negaran bashim." You have to start getting worried again, because like apparently he had bought his freedom from the judge when he charmed him, because he realized the noose was loosened after he talked to him that way. But then the workers had done a raid on the Israeli consulate, and they found some documents. Lo and behold, yes, my grandfather helped a lot, and their names were there. They were leaders in the community. They helped. I guess they sent funds to Israel somehow. And so he was back on the execution list. And so that's when this shudder went down my spine, and I said, we have nothing left to lose. So one day, I stopped the car in front of the prison door, and I started pointing at him. I want to talk to him, the judge. And this guy came out with a shotgun. And then I went blank. I fainted. I think I fell in my mother's arms. And then, like, I don't know how long it was, maybe half an hour or 10 minutes, she can tell. But I started coming to, and she was shaking me, and she said, "Sandra, have you lost your mind? What are you doing?" So the car disappeared. They opened the gate, and the door closed, and then we were just standing there like frozen. Then soon, sure enough, the door opens like just a wee bit, 45 degrees. Out comes the same guy who had a shotgun, but this time he had nothing. And he says, "Agha wants to see you." So we went inside and the door shut, and then I saw this really handsome man under his turban with a red goatee, blue eyes, the windshield, the window came down. It was one of those confiscated, beautiful green Peugeot, huge one. And it came down like this. And then I saw his face. Oh, so he's the judge. Because I had given him a letter in Qom. The Mujahid took me there. And so he recognized me. That's why I wasn't chucked in prison. He recognized my white chador, my veil. He says, who do you have? I said, my father. He says, what's his name? Yusef. So it reminded him. He said, meet me upstairs, but make sure to get a ticket. Who is with you? I said, my mom. Get a ticket from the kiosk here and go to the first floor, and I will meet you there. So it turns out that because they said, oh, my father sent MiGs or whatever, they hid the file. Like I had been inside the courthouse, inside the archive room. The files were like this high, these white folders full of prisoners' files. And the archive guy told me, every time his name comes up, I know this file. I remember, they keep putting it under. He says, this time I'm going to dovetail it. You'll have to stop the car of the judge. That's what you have. I said, when does he come? He said, okay. That's how that happened, that I stopped his car, because I had been through all I had met another guy downtown at the Toubkhane, at the Supreme Court. I even met Beheshti, who was killed later. Beheshti, one of those big ayatollahs that we'd see on TV. He spoke German. He was very well educated in German. So I knew I got to know the whole system inside and out. So when I met him upstairs with my mom, like he said, I have to turn the lights on, hold on.
Okay, now how many cars did you stop? One or two?
One, only one, Carol. Only
Okay.
one.
Okay, so I'm a little confused. So the one with the turban, that was when you went through the archives. Then he told you to stop the car of the judge.
No. When I went up to meet him, he said, go up. He said, where is the file? I said, it's here, I brought it. And I told him about the archive room. So he knew that at some time earlier, I had met the guy in the archive room. So there's no mistaking, the file is there. They are hiding, and he knew, he understood. By that time, he got the picture. But he kept thinking of my father. And that's what, it's got the ball rolling. And so there were 5 men surrounding him up there on the first floor. And those guys, none of them with a cravat, because that's very Western, typical. And they are the ones who made sure the file would go under. Each one had something to gain from this gold mine that was the factory. So, Carol, you're muted. So,
I know I'm muted because I don't
Okay.
want you to be disturbed on the sound at all.
Sure. Okay, so,
But now this makes it so amazing that you became an archivist. That is a major career.
it's like meant to be.
Unbelievable. It was your destiny.
Yeah, in a way, of course. And also that it's at the Anglican Diocese of Montreal. It's like interfaith, and it trying to reach out and put a stamp on, this is who we are. And please don't BDS us because we're good people. We don't deserve it. Anyway, I organized the whole archives there. It used to look like Vietnam. Now it looks like a library. But anyway, to go
Beautiful.
back.
I'm so proud of you.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you
So
so
proud of
much
you.
for
That's
doing
wonderful.
this. So then the judge, he told those 5 men, he said, I want the file on my desk on Monday at 10 o'clock.
Amazing, amazing what you did. I'm going to just ask one last thing. How then your father is released after 4 years in prison? How then did you end up leaving Iran? And then I'm going to want to open it up maybe for a few questions.
Yes. So the fact that the file was brought to the judge's desk finally, after 2 years after the court hearing, finally we can have a judgment. And because of his memory of my dad, it must have stayed etched in his memory, because this kind man knows how to speak with him in a way that is one-on-one, man-to-man, and he connected. So he remembered, and so he gave a judgment. Mr. Koukou, 5 years, the partner 3 years, and the Mohandes, the engineer, 2 years. And so he had to meet it out. 4.5 years passed. Somebody, my auntie Loris, she had a gardener who met my mom on Pahlavi Avenue. The name's changed to mullahs or whatever. And she said, oh, Yadullah, it's you. How have you been? How are you? And he said, he knows some people. He said, oh my God, Aghay Koukou in prison, such a kind man. No way. He says, I know some people in there, and they can. So in the end, he pulled some strings, and he came out in after 4.5 instead of 5 years. So when he came out, but even before he came out, when we were visiting, there's no light, just one moment.
What was the flights like in France?
There's an echo. So yeah, so when we were visiting behind the glass doors, my dad was telling us something like, I was told that when I come out, I could work for the government, like not go back to the factory, but work for the government and for a very big salary. And so like he was all gung-ho about that. And here I'm saying, oh my God, he still thinks everyone is an angel. They're gonna put him right back in prison. And this time, who knows if he'll ever get out. So he's gonna tell everybody in the States who's telling him, get out. He's gonna tell them, I have a daughter, yours truly, still to marry. I need money. I need to bring money out. And so I'm gonna stay still, So he would have kept me quiet, And so I was working at a Belgian company, and I was doing very well. I changed a 300 folder filing unit system, and the Belgians and the Germans were building the copper refinery that the Americans they were kicked out. So the Europeans came in to finish it. So I was in the head office, and they had all of these ships coming in and planes with steel structures and all kinds of material to build the copper electrolysis plant. And the goods were staying in storage in the Persian Gulf. They came from Rotterdam, and some things came by airplane and some by truck, and they wouldn't be cleared from customs. So they're just sitting there doing nothing, compiling storage fees. Meanwhile, the workers are just playing cards on site. And I had to take over because my boss had to go for vacation to Belgium. And I told them, they don't have it. Anyway, I fixed the filing system to the point where it's not like you don't have reams and reams of things in chronological order, but it was by ship, by truck, or by bus, or by plane. So now they could find all the correspondence to track down those shipments that they needed. So I had done all this. So I met an engineer who worked in that company, who was an expatriate.
Yes.
And who did tell me that if we get married and if we have kids, I would want nothing better than for the kids to be Jewish, to be brought up Jewish.
Sure.
And so I thought, okay, this is my story. This is what God has allotted me. And I have a chance to have kids. Like everybody, all the Iraqis left. There's nobody left here. And I have a chance to get out of this hellhole and get an education outside and not wear a scarf.
Sure.
So he was like, for me, an Apollo. He just took me on the wings of an eagle and took me
How
out.
did this get your father out of the country? Was he able to?
Because my leaving made a vacuum.
I see.
And he could know, Rachel, my mom's cousin here, told me that. She said, he would have kept you mum, so you can't say anything. And everyone in the States kept calling. And later I spoke with my dad when we worked on the book. He said, they kept calling me, my brother-in-law. Get out, what are you staying there for? Get out. And he said, one day I couldn't take it anymore. I fell to the floor, cried, and decided I'm leaving. And so he left. If I stayed there, who knows? Disaster, for sure.
So now we have the complete story of how you got to where you are. And you told it so beautifully. I want to thank you so much. And I also want to thank my silent angel, Bonnie. Thank you so much. And now we want to open it up for questions. Bonnie, would you like to direct the questions? So if people have a question, maybe they could put it in the chat or raise their hands.
Okay, can I start with a question of mine?
Of course, Bonnie.
Okay, I found the book, first of all, absolutely fascinating and so much food for thought. So he really saw the entirety of the Bible, of the prophecy, of how things actually came true, in the books of Nevi'im and all the prophets, there would be good times in Israel where the people followed the word of God, followed the book, they had good times, and then they strayed away from God's path and they would be exiled, or there would be war, or there would be calamity. And it seemed to go from utopia to calamity, sort of by people straying from the right path. And I think that your father really did come up with sort of or taking the blueprint from the Bible as a way
Yes.
for people to be, as a way, when he lived through the good times in Persia, in Iran, he saw, you even talked about your school where you had United Nations, you had diversity, where it was celebrated, where people respect each other, and how lovely that garden flourished. But it also talks about times where people discarded history, where in Iran, for instance, there was a Jewish musician, I forget what his name was, but that he had been at the forefront of creating what was it was in Iran.
It was in Iraq.
In
Yes.
Iraq.
The Kuwaiti
And the
brothers.
Al-Kuwaiti, right? And
Yeah.
how then this was erased from history. Take all the good that the Jews ever did and let's erase it. And I started to think, erasing history, that's sounding very, very apropos to our day and the woke generation and the idea of erasing history. So he really did have thoughts about
Like I
this.
told you, he was fighting so hard the last year and a half. His voice was just barely coming out. It was this hoarseness that came out all the time. And he felt that he had to, by hook or by crook, finish the book and get it out. And the whole thing of what's going on in Israel right now, it breaks my heart because I think that moment where I asked myself, who am I? That's what we all need to do now. And I am nothing without you. Because Israel is Klal Israel. We are, in the words of Rabbi Sachs, Judaism is a protest against empire. And what is happening in Israel now is asking us, it's God's way of, I think, asking us to not make statements such as the end of history. We are all about history. We are all about memory. And the memory is so short, or even it's not even there. I meet a lot of Ashkenazis who don't even know there were any Babylonian Jews. They don't even know there were Jews from Iraq. Well, they came, everything they have comes from us. They are an offshoot of us. I'm an offshoot of us. If I don't know about your story and what happened to you in Europe, I'm a nothing, because we're all part of one. I mean, we can say, oh, the Babylonian Jews, we're the real thing. We started, we're where it all began. But how snobbish can I be? Because while, and I learned this, while Hitler was putting Jews in gas chambers in Iran, in Iraq, the Iraqi Jews had no clue. They didn't know that was going on. They were going to their parties. They were having a beautiful life. the British were there, and so they had great jobs with the British. They went to, they played tennis in clubs. They had no clue while all this was going on in Europe. And now the Ashkenazi Jews, the European Jews in Israel, they have no clue about us, the Mizrahim, the ones who came from North Africa and Iraq and, you know, Iran, Lebanon, all these countries. They look at us as though we are, you know, the brown-skinned people. We are the ones who don't know much, don't know how to build an infrastructure. Hello, there was the finance minister of Iraq was an Iraqi Jew. His name was Karol Sasson, whatever. He told, you're muted. He told
Haskell Sassoon.
There you go. He told Iraq to base Iraqi currency on gold. You're muted.
If I could interject right now, maybe we want to move on to a couple of questions from the audience before we have to part. And I see Lydia's iPad. Do you have a question?
Sami Serrani.
Sammy Serrano, yes. And Sammy, I had the pleasure of, you're muted. Can he be unmuted, please?
How about now? Okay. Now,
Thank you,
when
Sammy.
I
I
reviewed
spoke with
the
you
book
last time.
that Sandra wrote, I found that in certain areas, as if your father, when he discussed the Bible, he had a sort of a spiritual contact with something unknown, totally unknown. It was something which attracted my attention. So I read the same thing again and again, and I found there is some mystery in the way he explained the Bible. That's one thing, and I think you should go over what he wrote and find out yourself. That's one thing. The second thing, when we were in Baghdad at the time of the Holocaust, certainly at the beginning we didn't know what is happening. Then all of a sudden, we had the British Army, the Jewish brigade, some of them came to Baghdad. So the Jewish community right away invited them, and 2, 3 of them, each family invited 2, 3 of them for dinner. And they told us all kinds of things, we couldn't believe it. And even when it was known that Hitler is trying to finish the Jews, then the Jewish community decided not to play music in the weddings of Jews. And that was something that really a sort of a sympathy with the European Jews. The music played in the weddings was stopped totally. So, you know, we had good information about what is going on through the Jewish soldiers. And it was the Jewish soldiers of the Jewish brigade in the British Army. There were those who helped us find a way to establish the underground activity and defend ourselves when time is necessary. I was involved in that, but not in the military part of it, only with other part of it. So, and I would like one day to write a story how I worked. I was only 15 years old, smuggling money from Baghdad to outside Baghdad to people who really need some help. Like, you know, a person who has $100, a person who has 50 pounds, you know, they want to smuggle that. And there was a system that the underground activity worked on that. I was involved 100% on that, collecting the money, and went to the smugglers to give them the money, and they give me the code, and I come back to my people and tell them, this is what I get, and it was correct. Yeah.
Wow. But I
Wow.
was right that in the beginning you had no clue, you didn't know.
Yeah, we had no clue at the beginning. Yeah.
So that
And,
clues us into the fact that we need to know more about each other.
Right.
The Iraqis,
Exactly.
the Mizrahim have to reach out to the Ashkenazim. We have to tell them our story, and they have to reach out to us because, you know, like you said, Sami Surani is our history scholar, Bonnie. He said the only reason why we have conservadox, orthodox, reform, all these different things is because we were exiled. Because at the foot of Mount Sinai, there were no conservatives or orthodox or conservadox or reforms. There were just Jews. And now, thank God we have this plurality. How beautiful we have. My father used to say, my kids are all like flowers in a garden. Each one has its own perfume.
Beautiful.
The same as us, each one of our tables, our Shabbat tables, they don't look alike. Their spices are different. They're not the same, but we do Shabbat, all of us. And that is what counts. And thank God for the differences.
Okay. I'm gonna have to ask us to all come to a conclusion because we were supposed to go on for an hour. What do you think, Bonnie? And
Yes, I just wanted to, there were a few comments in the chat. Thank you so much for your family story. You're so courageous.
So
Excellent recounting of a poignant and relevant part of Jewish history. Thank you, Sandra and Carol from Gigi Piton.
In the end, my dad came out through the border.
Such a touching story of courage, spirituality, and resilience. I love it, and I loved hearing it from you, Sandra. I can just imagine what he conducted with all the cellmates, taking turns expressing the story. The reason he succeeded is because he can tap into a higher power and see a vision. He became inspired by the Bible studies in a way that we can all learn. And yes, Ranit Moellem, I think she really summarized it, really got it. Lisette Shashua wanted to make known to everybody about the Farhud in Iraq in 1941, which they can call the Iraqi Kristallnacht, and tragedy from utopia to tragedy in many areas of the world, in the Middle East, in Europe. Somehow it seems to follow us, but the reason we're still here, as said so well by your father, Sandra, is because of the Bible. And how many other people in history just don't exist anymore. And yet we were able to maintain our small numbers spread throughout the world. And it's time now, through Zoom, through our modern technology, to come together in various organizations like Kulanu that are getting little known Jewish communities in South America and Africa and India and so forth.
You know, Bonnie, the Bible is not man's story about God. It's God's story about man. This is Rabbi Sachs saying it.
Yeah.
That's why we stayed so long.
Yes.
Because we have been taken by, and we're still being held by an outstretched hand.
Yes.
It's that's why we're here. And as long as we refuse to connect to our roots, read our Bible, go to Shabbat, go meet our congregations and keep our closeness to who we are, we're going to have problems. We're going to have problems. And he was a bridge builder. He wanted to make bridges between not only us Jews, but also between us and the Christians, and that's what I'm doing at the Diocese of Montreal, the Anglican Diocese. He with other faith communities, because we're all created in the image of God. And when you read the Torah, the Parsha of the week, and Rabbi Whitman does such beautiful, beautiful talks. You know, we have a wealth of resources. We have no excuse. We have all this technology available to us. And we now can tell one another our stories. There are collections made of all the people who survived the European Holocaust, and there's now a huge collection that's a growing one of the testimonials of all of us, the Middle Eastern and North African Jews. But at some point, the lines have to be blurred. We have to come together. We have no choice.
Sandra, that's the message, and that's the message of your dad. That's the message of so many interfaith religious leaders, and of course our esteemed Rabbi Whitman, who does so much outreach. And you know, this is what we want to continue. So time is really, we've run like way over time, and there's so much to talk about, but I think this is just the beginning. So thank you so much, Sandra, for putting yourself out there. I mean, I know it was so heartfelt, and it's hard things to talk about.
It's such a hard topic to talk about that I had to reach out to Carol.
There's so much love there, you know, and the loss and the grief that's, you know, comes to the surface very easily. And we really appreciate your candor and your storytelling. Thank you to Carol for facilitating this beautiful talk, and may it be the beginning. Stu, thanks for the technology. Steve Spodek and programming. Jackie at the office, our president, Peter Safran, and my mentor, Sheila Isar. And thank you so much to Rabbi Whitman for always
thank you, Rabbi Whitman.
supporting us.
You're amazing.